The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest building ever made by thinking creatures. It floated in the empty space between three star systems, and its walls were made of crystal that had been grown over 10,000 years. Inside, representatives from 912 different species sat in their assigned seats. They had come to discuss the newest problem in the galaxy. Humans. High Arbiter Vexnoth stood at the central podium. His body was long and thin, covered in silver scales that caught the light from 100 different suns streaming through the crystal walls. He had served as High Arbiter for 300 years, and in all that time, he had never seen anything like this. "We must address the human situation," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber via translation implants that every species wore. "They have broken the first law of civilized warfare for the 17th time this cycle." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. The first law was simple. When a superior force demanded surrender, the inferior force must comply. This law had kept peace in the galaxy for millions of years. It prevented unnecessary death. It preserved infrastructure. It allowed conquered peoples to live on under new rulers rather than dying in pointless battles. Every species in the galaxy followed this law. It was written into their very nature by evolution itself. When you could not win, you submitted. This was logical. This was right. This was the only way civilizations could survive. But humans did not seem to understand this. Ambassador Chen Wei stood up from the human delegations section. She was small compared to most of the aliens in the room. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. But her eyes were sharp, and her voice did not shake when she spoke. "The Galactic Council has invited us to explain ourselves," she said. "So I will explain." Vexnoth gestured with one of his four arms. "Please, Ambassador, help us understand why your species continues to violate the most basic law of civilized behavior." Chen Wei nodded. 3 months ago, the Krath Empire sent a fleet of 2,000 warships to our colony on New Brisbane. They demanded our immediate surrender. According to your laws, we should have lowered our weapons, opened our doors, and accepted whatever fate the Krath chose for us. "That is correct," Vexnoth said. "The Krath had superior numbers, superior firepower. By all measures, resistance was illogical." "The colony had 40,000 people," Chen Wei continued. "Farmers, teachers, children. The Krath are known for taking slaves. They work their slaves until they die, usually within 5 years. So when they demanded surrender, our people refused." "And then they died anyway," called out the Krath delegate, a massive creature covered in black armor plating. "Your people killed 800 of our warriors before we destroyed their pathetic defenses. If they had surrendered, they would still be alive." "Would they?" Chen Wei asked. "Alive as slaves, working in your mines until their bodies broke, watching their children taken away to serve in your armies." The Krath delegate made a sound of contempt. "That is how the universe works. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the natural order." "Not to us," Chen Wei said. Vexnoth raised his hand for silence. "Ambassador Chen, the universe does have rules. These rules have been tested over millions of years by thousands of species. When you cannot win, you surrender. This preserves life. Your species' refusal to accept this simple truth is causing chaos across the galaxy." Chen Wei looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens. Some were vast creatures of living crystal. Others were small things that floated in nutrient tanks. There were beings made of light, beings made of metal, beings that existed partially in other dimensions. All of them had one thing in common. They all believed in surrender. "Let me tell you a story," she said. "About 500 years ago, before we developed space travel, there was a battle on Earth. A force of 300 soldiers defended a narrow mountain pass against an army of over 100,000. The chamber went quiet. Such numbers were absurd. 300 against 100,000. The larger army sent a messenger to the defenders, Chen Wei continued. He told them that their arrows would be so numerous they would block out the sun. Do you know what the defenders said? No one answered. They said, then we will fight in the shade. The Krath delegate laughed, a horrible grinding sound. And they died, of course, stupid creatures. Yes, Chen Wei said. They died, but they held that pass for 3 days. They killed thousands of their enemies, and their sacrifice gave their people time to prepare their defenses. In the end, the invasion failed. Vexnoth's scales flickered with confusion. I do not understand. They died. Their sacrifice changed nothing in the immediate battle. Why do you tell this story as if it were a victory? Because to us it was, Chen Wei said. Those 300 men became legends. For thousands of years after, their story inspired others to stand against impossible odds. They showed that the measure of a life is not its length, but what you do with it. This is madness, said the delegate from the Vorn Collective, a hive mind that occupied 17 star systems. We have studied your history. Your species has fought itself constantly. Millions have died in your wars. You glorify death and suffering. No, Chen Wei said. We glorify courage. We glorify the choice to stand when others would kneel. We do not seek death, but we do not fear it more than we fear losing our freedom. Vexnoth looked at the data pad in front of him. In the past 10 years, human forces have refused surrender on 47 occasions. In 31 of those cases, they were ultimately destroyed. That is a 66% fatality rate for refusal to surrender. And in the other 16 cases, the High Arbiter was silent for a moment. In the other 16 cases, human forces achieved victory despite overwhelming odds against them. Impossible odds, Chen Wei corrected. Your own analysts said our victory was impossible in every single one of those battles, but we won anyway. Do you know why? Your technology is not superior to ours, the Krath delegate said. Your ships are adequate but not exceptional. Your weapons are standard. There is nothing special about your species. You're wrong, Chen Wei said. There is something special about us. When we fight, we are not calculating odds. We are not measuring outcomes. We are fighting for something that cannot be measured. Freedom, home, family, honor. These things matter more to us than survival. The chamber erupted in confused discussion. The concept was alien to almost every species present. Survival was the primary drive of all life. Everything else was secondary. How could any creature value abstract concepts more than its own existence? Vexnoth called for order. Ambassador Chen, the Council recognizes that your species is different, but difference alone does not exempt you from galactic law. You must learn to surrender when the situation demands it. Chen Wei smiled, but there was no warmth in it. High Arbiter, with respect, you cannot teach us to be something we are not. You speak of galactic law as if it were a natural force like gravity, but it is not. It is a choice that every species has made, and humanity chooses differently. Then there will be war, the Krath delegate said. We will teach you to surrender the hard way. Chen Wei turned to face the massive alien directly. Others have tried. They are no longer trying. The chamber fell silent again. Everyone knew what she meant. The Krath were not the first to attack human colonies. The Sisterhood of Eternal Night had tried. The Machine Lords of Sector 7 had tried. The living ships of the Void Collective had tried. All of them had expected quick victories against the young species. All of them had learned that humans did not surrender, did not break, did not stop fighting until they won or died. And somehow, against all logic and all probability, humans kept winning. I have one more story, Chen Wei said, if the Council will permit me. Vexnoth gestured for her to continue. 200 years ago, when we first achieved faster-than-light travel, we encountered the Drelth Empire. They were powerful, ancient. They had ruled their sector of space for 50,000 years. When they found us, They saw a weak, primitive species that would make excellent slaves. She paused, letting the memory settle over the chamber. They demanded our surrender. We refused. They sent a fleet to Earth, 1,000 ships against our 47. Every logical calculation said we would lose. Your computers would have given us a 0% chance of survival. And yet Earth still exists, Vexnoth said slowly. The Drelth Empire does not. No, Chenwei agreed. It does not, because we fought for 5 years. We lost millions. We lost colonies. We lost ships, but we never stopped fighting. And in the end, the Drelth learned something that every enemy of humanity eventually learns. She looked around the chamber one final time. There are some things worse than death, and surrender to evil is one of them. The universe may have rules about surrender, but humanity disagrees with all of them, and we will keep disagreeing until the universe changes or we are gone. Either outcome is acceptable to us. She sat down. The chamber remained silent for a very long time. 3 months after the council meeting, the Krath Empire launched its invasion. They sent 10,000 warships toward human space. It was the largest fleet assembled in 300 years. Their plan was simple: overwhelming force, total destruction of human military capabilities, then a systematic conquest of every human world. The humans had 2,000 ships to defend their territory, 5-to-1 odds against them. By galactic standards, surrender was not just expected, it was required. Fleet Admiral James Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance, flagship of the Human Defense Force. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and scars on his face from battles he had fought decades ago. He had never lost a major engagement. "Admiral," his sensor officer called out, "Krath fleet has entered the Proxima system. They will reach weapons range in 4 hours." Rodriguez nodded. "Signal all ships. Execute Operation Thermopylae." The human fleet began to move, but they did not move to engage the enemy directly. Instead, they scattered into the asteroid fields that surrounded the Proxima system. On the Krath flagship, War Master Krethvok watched the human movements with confusion. What are they doing? They should be forming defensive lines. They should be surrendering. Perhaps they are retreating, his tactical officer suggested. To where? There is nowhere to go. We have them trapped. But the humans were not retreating. They were hunting. The first Krath ships died without warning. They were scouting vessels, separated from the main fleet to search the asteroid fields. One moment they were scanning for human positions. The next moment, human ships appeared behind them, fired, and vanished back into the rocks. "They are using the asteroids as cover," the tactical officer reported. "Our sensors cannot track them effectively." Krethvok snarled, "Then burn the asteroids, all of them." The Krath fleet opened fire on the asteroid fields. Millions of rocks were vaporized in minutes, but for every asteroid they destroyed, 100 more remained. And somewhere in that maze of stone and metal, human ships waited. The battle lasted 17 hours. It was not a single engagement, but 1,000 small ones. Human ships would appear, strike, and disappear. They used the asteroids as weapons, ramming them into Krath vessels with carefully calculated trajectories. They planted mines in the debris fields. They set traps and ambushes at every turn. By the time the Krath fleet emerged from the asteroid fields, they had lost 800 ships. More importantly, they had lost something that could not be replaced: their certainty. For the first time in the history of the Krath Empire, their warriors began to hesitate. Every shadow could hide a human ship. Every piece of debris could be a bomb. Every moment of silence could end in fire. Admiral Rodriguez watched from a concealed position as the Krath fleet regrouped. They had lost 8% of their force before the real battle had even begun. "Phase 1 complete," he said. "Begin Phase 2. The human fleet reformed into a defensive line in front of the planet New Carthage. a major human colony. 20 million people lived there. 20 million people who refused to evacuate, who refused to run, who chose to stay and face whatever came. The Krath fleet advanced. They were still overwhelming in numbers. 9,200 ships against 1,800, but they advanced slowly now, carefully, watching for tricks. Krethvok opened a communication channel. "Human commander, you have fought well, but this battle is decided. Surrender now and we will be merciful." Rodriguez's face appeared on the Krath view screens. "War Master, I have a counteroffer. Turn your ships around. Leave human space. Never return." "You cannot be serious. You are outnumbered 5-1. "I am completely serious, and the odds do not matter." Krethvok laughed. "Every species says that. Every species is wrong." "Then come and prove it." The communication ended. The Krath fleet attacked. What followed was the Battle of New Carthage, which would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The human fleet should have been destroyed in the first hour. They were outgunned, outmanned, and outmaneuvered. But they did not fight like any other species in the galaxy. Human ships did not try to survive. They tried to win. There is a difference. A ship trying to survive will retreat from danger, will seek cover, will prioritize its own existence. A ship trying to win will charge into danger, will take risks, will sacrifice itself if that sacrifice means victory. The Krath had never faced an enemy who did not fear death. Human ships rammed Krath vessels at full speed. Human pilots flew into the heart of enemy formations, knowing they would not come out. Human captains ordered their crews to abandon ship and then steered their dying vessels into Krath command structures. For every human ship that fell, they took 3 Krath ships with them. Rodriguez watched his fleet dying. Each lost ship was a knife in his heart. He knew the names of every captain, had shared drinks with most of them, had trained many of them himself. "Admiral," his communications officer said quietly, "the colony is sending a message." A video appeared on his screen. 20 million people standing in the streets of New Carthage's cities, looking up at the sky where lights flashed as ships died. They were not running. They were not hiding. They were watching and waiting and hopping. A woman held up a sign that said simply, "We believe in you." Rodriguez closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them. "Signal all ships. Execute Hannibal Protocol." His officers looked at him with shock. The Hannibal Protocol was desperate. It was dangerous. It was probably suicide. But it might work. The remaining human ships, barely 600 now, formed into a tight wedge formation. They accelerated directly toward the center of the Krath fleet. Krethvok watched them come with disbelief. "What are they doing? They're coming straight at us." "It appears to be a ramming attack, War Master." "Against our entire fleet, that's insane." But it was not a ramming attack. It was something worse. The human ships were carrying mining charges, industrial explosives meant for breaking apart asteroids. Each ship had been loaded with enough charges to create a small sun. As the human wedge drove into the heart of the Krath fleet, the first ships began to detonate. Not from Krath weapons, from their own crews. Human captains were triggering their explosives manually, turning their ships into bombs that consumed everything around them. The chain reaction lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the Krath fleet had lost 4,000 ships, not to conventional weapons, to human sacrifice, to crews who chose to die so that their people might live. Krethvok stared at his tactical display with something he had never felt before. Fear. He still had 5,000 ships. The humans had less than 200 left. By every measure, he should continue the attack. The humans could not stop him now. But his warriors were terrified. They had just watched their comrades die by the thousands, not in battle, but in fire that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Human ships that should have been trying to escape were instead diving toward them like living weapons. "War Master," his tactical officer whispered, "our crews are refusing to advance." Krethvog turned to look at him. "What?" "They are afraid. They say the humans are demons. They say anyone who fights them is cursed." "That is superstition, weakness." "Yes, War Master, but it is spreading through the fleet. If we press the attack, we may face mutiny." Krethvog looked at the battlefield. Debris from thousands of ships formed a cloud so thick it was blocking starlight. Somewhere in that cloud the last human ships waited, ready to die, ready to take more craft with them. He thought about his orders: conquer humanity, break their spirit, teach them to surrender. But how do you break the spirit of creatures who welcome death? For the first time in his life, Krethvog gave an order that went against everything his species believed. "Signal the fleet, we are withdrawing." News of the Krath withdrawal spread across the galaxy within hours. The implications were staggering. A superior force had retreated from an inferior one, not because they were defeated, but because they were afraid. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. "This cannot be allowed to stand," the Krath delegate thundered. "The humans have poisoned the natural order. They have introduced chaos into a universe that requires order." Vexnoth nodded slowly. "The situation is unprecedented. In all recorded history, no species has successfully convinced a superior force to retreat through fear alone." "They did not win," the Krath delegate insisted. "They lost most of their fleet. They should have surrendered." "And yet," Vexnoth said quietly, "your fleet is the one that left." Ambassador Chen Wei sat in her designated seat, listening to the arguments swirl around her. The human delegation had received heroes' welcomes when they returned to Earth. Admiral Rodriguez was being called the greatest military commander in human history. Songs were already being written about the Battle of New Carthage. But Chen Wei knew the truth. They had won nothing. The Krath would return. Others would test humanity again. The galaxy was vast, and there were always predators looking for easy prey. "The Council must take action," the Vorn Collective's representative said through its translation device. "If humanity is allowed to continue violating galactic law, other species may begin to question the laws themselves." "That is precisely the danger," agreed the delegate from the crystal mines of Axis 7. "The surrender law has maintained stability for eons. If species begin to believe they can resist superior forces, chaos will follow." Chen Wei stood. "May I address the council?" Vexnoth gestured for her to speak. "You fear chaos," she said. "I understand. Your laws have created a certain kind of peace. A peace where the strong rule and the weak obey. A peace where might makes right and the powerless have no voice." She walked to the center of the chamber, where all eyes could see her. "But tell me, council members, is that truly peace, or is it just a slower form of death?" "Survival is not death," the Krath delegate said. "Slavery is unpleasant, but the slaves live." "Do they?" Chen Wei asked. "When I was young, I read ancient texts from Earth. One of them said, 'Give me liberty or give me death.' Another said, 'It is better to die on your feet than live on your knees.' These ideas are woven into our very being. We cannot be the creatures you want us to be." Vexnoth's scales shifted colors, a sign of deep thought. "Ambassador, I have studied your species since our first contact. I admit I do not understand you. Your behavior defies evolutionary logic. How did creatures who refuse to surrender survive long enough to develop civilization?" Chen Wei smiled. "Because surrender is not the only path to survival. Sometimes the will to fight is what keeps you alive." She pulled up a holographic display showing human history. Wars and conflicts filled the timeline, yes, but so did something else. "Look at this pattern," she said. "Every time humans faced extinction, every time a superior force tried to conquer us or destroy us, we fought back. Sometimes we lost, but we never stopped, and eventually we always won." How? Asked the delegate from the harmony of spheres, a species that had evolved to avoid all conflict. Because our enemies gave up. They grew tired. They decided we were not worth the trouble, or they made mistakes because they were so certain of victory. Our refusal to accept defeat became a weapon more powerful than any ship or bomb. The chamber was silent as the delegates processed this. You call our behavior chaos, Chen Wei continued, but I call it hope. Hope that tomorrow can be better than today. Hope that the weak can become strong. Hope that even the most terrible enemy can be defeated if you refuse to stop fighting. Hope is not a strategy, the Krath delegate said dismissively. No, Chen Wei agreed. It is not a strategy. It is something more important. It is the reason to have a strategy at all. Without hope, why would anyone fight? Without hope, why would anyone do anything except surrender and wait to die? She turned to address Vex, Noth directly. High Arbiter, you say the surrender law has maintained stability for millions of years, but stability is not the same as progress. In all that time, has the galaxy truly changed? Have the strong become less cruel? Have the weak gained more rights? Or has everything stayed exactly the same, with the powerful taking what they want and everyone else accepting it? Vex Noth did not answer. Humanity offers the galaxy something new, Chen Wei said. A different way of being. We believe that might does not make right. We believe that freedom is worth dying for. We believe that even the smallest creature can stand against the greatest evil if it has the courage to try. Pretty words, the Krath delegate said, but words do not win wars. You're right, Chen Wei said. Actions win wars, and our actions at New Carthage have shown the galaxy something it has never seen before, a species that cannot be conquered through fear, a species that welcomes death rather than chains, a species that will never ever stop fighting. She returned to her seat. The Council may do as it wishes, condemn us, sanction us, declare war on us. It does not matter. We will not change. We cannot change. And in time, I believe you will understand why that is not a weakness but our greatest strength. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates called for immediate military action against humanity. Others suggested quarantine, isolating human space from the rest of the galaxy. A few quietly expressed curiosity, even admiration, for the strange little species that refused to bow. In the end, the Council reached no decision. They could not agree on how to handle a problem that their entire civilization had been built to prevent. Humanity continued to exist, continued to fight, continued to refuse every demand for surrender. And across the galaxy, other species began to watch, and wonder, and hope. 5 years passed. The Krath Empire launched 3 more invasions of human space. Each one was larger than the last. Each one failed, not because humans won every battle, but because they never stopped fighting, and eventually the cost became too high even for the mighty Krath. After the 3rd invasion failed, something unprecedented happened. Slaves in the Krath Empire began to rebel. It started on mining colonies in the outer reaches of Krath space. Species that had served the Krath for thousands of years suddenly refused to work. When the Krath sent soldiers to force compliance, the slaves fought back. They died by the millions, but they did not surrender. They had learned something from watching humanity. Death was not the worst thing that could happen. Surrender was. The rebellion spread like fire across dry grass. Within 2 years, the Krath Empire had lost 40% of its territory, not to external enemies, but to the slaves they had believed were completely broken. Krethvok, who had survived the Battle of New Carthage only to watch his empire crumble, sent a message to the human government. "What have you done to us?" he demanded. "You have poisoned the galaxy with your madness." Admiral Rodriguez, now retired and teaching at Earth's military academy, received the message and laughed. "We didn't do anything," he replied. "We just showed everyone what was possible. The choice to fight was always theirs. They just needed to see that it could be done. The Galactic Council convened again and again, trying to restore order. But order would not come. Species across the galaxy were questioning laws that had governed their lives for millions of years. Why must the weak surrender? Why must might make right? Why must the universe be arranged for the convenience of the powerful? Vexnoth watched his carefully balanced civilization begin to shift. He had served as High Arbiter for over 300 years, guiding the galaxy through countless crises. But this crisis was different. This was not about territory or resources or power. This was about ideas. And ideas, he was learning, could not be defeated by force. He requested a private meeting with Ambassador Chen Wei. "I am old," he said when they sat together in his private chambers. "I have seen empires rise and fall, but I have never seen anything like what your species has caused." "We have caused nothing," Chen Wei said. "We simply exist. We are who we are." "That is not entirely true. Your existence is a challenge to everything the galaxy has believed. Before you came, the surrender law was unquestioned. Now, everywhere I look, species are asking if there is another way." Chen Wei nodded. "Is that a bad thing?" Vexnoth was silent for a long moment. "I do not know. The old way maintained peace. Yes, it was a peace built on oppression, but it was stable. What you offer is uncertainty, change, perhaps even chaos." "Perhaps," Chen Wei agreed. "But perhaps it is also hope. Hope that the future can be better than the past. Hope that those who suffer under the old laws might one day be free." "And what if the chaos destroys everything? What if your ideas tear the galaxy apart?" Chen Wei met his eyes. "Then at least we will have tried. Humanity believes that it is better to fail while reaching for something great than to succeed at something small. We would rather burn bright for a moment than glow dimly forever." Vexnoth's scales shifted through colors that had no names in human language. "I have lived for 500 years. In all that time, I have never questioned the fundamental order of things. But speaking with you, watching your species, I find myself wondering if I have wasted my life maintaining a system that was never truly just." "It is never too late to change," Chen Wei said. "That is another thing humanity believes. No matter how old you are, no matter how long you have walked a certain path, you can always choose a different direction." The old arbiter looked at her for a long time. "Your species frightens me, Ambassador, but it also gives me something I have not felt in centuries." "What is that?" "Hope." 10 years after first contact, humanity was no longer an isolated species on the edge of the galaxy. They had allies, species that had watched them fight and been inspired, species that had lived under oppression for generations and finally found the courage to resist. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was changing. New voices were being heard. New laws were being proposed. The surrender requirement was no longer universal. Species were being allowed to choose their own paths. Ambassador Chen Wei, now elderly herself, gave her final address to the council before retiring. "When we first came to this chamber," she said, "you told us that the universe has rules about surrender. You were right. The universe did have rules, but rules are not natural laws. Rules are made by thinking creatures, and thinking creatures can unmake them." She looked around at the assembled delegates. So many familiar faces, and so many new ones. Species that had been slaves 10 years ago now sat as equals among their former masters. "Humanity disagrees with many things. We disagree that might makes right. We disagree that the weak must always bow to the strong. We disagree that surrender is the only response to overwhelming force. And we will continue to disagree, loudly and proudly, until the day our species ceases to exist." She smiled, the wrinkles on her face deepening. "But we have learned something too. We have learned that we are not alone in our disagreement. Across this vast galaxy, countless creatures share our belief that freedom matters more than survival. They were always there. They were just waiting for someone to show them that it was possible to resist. She raised her hand in a gesture of farewell. The universe has rules about surrender. Humanity disagrees with all of them. And now, thanks to the courage of countless species who chose to stand with us, so does the galaxy. Thank you. As she left the chamber for the last time, the delegates rose. Not all of them, but many, more than half. They rose and watched her go, this small human woman who had helped change everything. And somewhere in the back of the chamber, a young delegate from a species that had only recently freed itself from bondage turned to their companion and whispered, "I want to be like them." The universe had rules about surrender, but humanity had disagreed. And in the end, disagreement had become revolution. Revolution had become hope. And hope had become a new way of being for all the galaxy's creatures who had ever dreamed of freedom. The old laws were not completely gone. The powerful still had power. The strong still had strength. But something fundamental had shifted. The weak no longer believed they had to surrender. The oppressed no longer believed their fate was sealed. And that belief, that simple, stubborn, unreasonable belief that things could be different, was changing everything. In homes across 10,000 worlds, children were growing up hearing stories about humans, about the species that refused to kneel, about the Battle of New Carthage, about Admiral Rodriguez and his desperate charge, about Ambassador Chen Wei and her words that had shaken the foundations of galactic civilization. These children would grow up with different beliefs than their parents. They would question laws that had never been questioned. They would dream of futures that had never seemed possible. They would look at the stars and see not a universe of predators and prey, but a universe of possibilities. And when those children were old enough to take their places in the galaxy, they would carry those beliefs with them. They would spread them further. They would make them real. The universe has rules about surrender. Humanity disagreed with all of them. And humanity turned out to be right. Not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced than anyone else, but because they understood something that billions of years of galactic civilization had somehow forgotten. Rules are just ideas, and ideas can be changed. All it takes is the courage to disagree. All it takes is the will to stand when everyone tells you to kneel. All it takes is hope. Humanity had that. They had always had it, and they had shared it with the galaxy, not through conquest or force, but simply by existing, simply by being who they were, simply by refusing to be anything else. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, in the end, was exactly what humanity wanted. Not victory, not power, not dominion over others. Just freedom. Freedom for everyone. That was worth fighting for. That was worth dying for. That was worth disagreeing with the entire universe for. And humanity would keep disagreeing, keep fighting, keep hopping, for as long as stars burned in the void. Because that was who they were. That was who they would always be. The species that said no. The species that refused. The species that changed everything. Humanity.